It takes a surprising amount of effort to make it look like you've made no effort.
Same. You can accidentally find main things by accidentally playing the game. Just doing your thing.
I feel like accidentally playing the game should be the tagline for Momus's streams. the number of times those just get derailed and we make no progress in whatever game he's playing for 45 minutes.
Because it's how long it took him to play Final Fantasy VIII. He didn't play Final Fantasy VIII.
Yeah.
It's the amount of time he spent on Final Fantasy VIII to have not played it.
Yeah. I think he did, like 4 or 5 streams and made it maybe a half an hour into the game.
Extra protein oatmeal. As it has got protein powder in there, not like fancy oatmeal.
Yeah, they have these Kodiaks that got recalled here that they have that extra protein. I don't know why. They seem to be okay. So,
have you been eating them?
No, I mean, I've had them in the past, but they
since the recall. That's how anti-establishment Legion is. Oh, recall? Fuck you! I'm buying them.
Oh, it's one of those.
I'm gonna go out of my way to buy the recalled food.
You go around to your neighbors' houses. Yeah, if you got any, I'll drop it off. No problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
No Kennedy, recall my ass.
Damn rich people throwing away food for no goddamn reason.
I don't want to sign up for fucking Disney as well. Jesus.
Just make sure nobody close to you dies at a Disney park once you sign up.
Put that in the pre-clips. Look how intelligent we are.
Before we begin, the Gamers Advocate would like to remind you that any episode could contain game spoilers, so watch or listen with discretion. And now your hosts, AMKomnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
Welcome on in to yet another episode.
We were
of the
totally
Gamers
ready.
Mid-sentence. Mid-fucking sentence.
For another Gamers Advocate podcast. We are joined with AMKomnenos, BananaHammockRepublic.
Nice lighting.
Who I will say,
Who was clearly prepared for this.
Yeah, we're professionals here. But Banana has been working on a Let's Play, so be looking forward to that one. It's going to be epic.
Actually, by the time this episode goes out, the Let's Play should be published.
Mm-hmm.
Or the first few episodes, at least.
So if you like RPGs, tactical games, and
terrible voice acting.
I was going to say amazing voice acting because
well, that's why I beat you to it, because you're wrong.
Well, Banana has so Banana does not give himself enough credit because I find Banana.
I think he gives himself the appropriate amount of credit.
I think when I listen to Banana and when he starts getting into his head, it's very funny. Banana is very funny. I cannot be nearly as funny as Banana is just naturally. So kudos to Banana for that. So be looking for that here pretty soon.
So you notice, and I appreciate that compliment, but I notice you completely changed the subject because I said I do terrible voice acting and you're like, Banana's really funny.
But I mean, it all kind of comes into play because
I think I know why we're doing That's Nice. It's because Legion has gotten a lot of practice about giving things compliments when they're not relevant.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of your voice acting, like in the episodes, you've got a very nice beard. Really, really nice.
In this Let's Play where there is no face cam.
I've often said I have a voice for radio and a face for face for radio. Yeah, face for radio. I messed that up.
I will say I think
you did.
I think
that's the depth of my comedy is just unintentionally misappropriating information.
Like you said, the depth of Legion's comedy is getting colloquialisms wrong.
You also said it with the energy for a graveyard.
I'm going to come back and haunt you.
No. Tell us another colloquialism.
Yeah. Well, we're going to do a game. We haven't played this game in a really long. Getting back to the
episode.
Yeah, come on back. Reel it in. We haven't played this game in a long time. It's called That's Nice. So say something nice. We'll start with Banana. 30 seconds, or just as long as you can go, really, about Fable.
Sure. So it has been a while since I played Fable, and what I remember from Fable, and I think it's something I've mentioned on previous episodes, is that tutorial sequence feels really clever. The idea that it's you as a kid and you're practicing things that will become game mechanics in the future, but they don't feel as big a deal in the moment. You're a child who's swinging a wooden sword at straw dummies. You're not like, oh, this is going to be an intense game where life and death is decided by my actions. You're just a kid having fun. And then that is the mechanic when you grow up and become this hero who has to go on this epic adventure. And it's the same mechanics that you had from when you were a little kid in the tutorial, but now the stakes are raised. And I think that's a really clever way of giving your players kind of that insight to how the game works, but not really like ruining the mood and kind of letting your tutorial be a part of the experience rather than like this disconnected entry in the game. So I really appreciated that. And then I think Legion and I talked about this a little bit before the episode. Like, one of the best things about Fable is that it provided the groundwork for Fable 2, which is a much better game. But it did set the basis that Fable 2 was built off of, and Fable 2 took a lot of what was in Fable 1 and polished it. So as much as it feels like a cop-out to say the best thing about Fable is Fable 2, it really set the groundwork and laid the frame for what people really wanted to see in Fable 2, and the developers took the feedback from their audience to polish those aspects. And you don't get that polish without Fable. So they had to do something right in the beginning, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. And I as much as like I really, really enjoyed Fable 2, Fable 1 is a good game. It's just, it got better in Fable 2.
Comments like ditto.
Don't have my brother. No, mine is much briefer. I think what I remember about it, because I played it once when it came out, so I really enjoyed it at the time, but I've never gone back and played it. I've never had the urge to. But I remember it being a peculiarly British game, and I really liked that. Yeah. It felt like a lot of fantasy games have been inspired by, whether they be high fantasy or low fantasy, they've been inspired by things like The Lord of the Rings. They've been inspired by the same sort of classics of fantasy literature, whereas it felt like Fable was more inspired by Monty Python and the Holy Grail, or the next one's actually American, or The Princess Bride, or something like that. It just had a very, very different tone to what you would normally expect from fantasy, and I think to this day,
it was very British, like Goodfellas.
Yeah. Like, hey. I was going to say, I'm walking here, but I think A, they don't say that, and B, there's like 15 famous lines from that film I could have gone with. Fuck.
It's a line from a different movie.
Anyway, enough about When Harry Met Sally.
Yeah.
A peculiarly British game is with a very different set of inspirations than what I think fantasy gaming tends to take its inspiration from. It wasn't from the more traditional classical canon. It was from it's from a history of fart jokes. And I think that's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing that we have that as a very, very different game than what fantasy normally is. So I mainly remember it for it being unique, peculiarly British, and that's what sticks out.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, it draws inspiration from the stories surrounding King Arthur. And that is a Great Britain folklore kind of thing. Like, it might piss off a few people, but if I remember correctly, King Arthur was actually Welsh, so not English, but Great Britain. And if I mean, I could get this wrong too, but I think Albion is almost an archaic reference or an archaic way of referring to Great Britain. So the idea that Fable set in Albion has this kind of uniquely British feel to it is very much appropriate.
Yeah, it's actually a very easy game to say nice things about. I don't think it was a particularly amazing game. I don't think it's stuck with me over the years, but it's a work. It's a work that's very unique, and I mean that in the sense of having sort of an auteur behind it. I think any game that Peter Molyneux makes, it's going to be possibly derived from a genre we already know, but it's never going to feel quite like the games that came before it. In the same way that if Kojima makes a game, and if Kojima were to say to you tomorrow, okay, I'm making a strategy game, you'd find yourself thinking, okay, he's making a strategy game, but what else is he going to do? What's going to be the other bit? I think with Peter Molyneux, you get the same thing. You get, okay, Molyneux is going to make a classic fantasy adventure, but what's the other bit going to be? What's the interesting part going to be? And then you saw all the things you could do with your character, the way they could change physically, the way you could interact with almost everyone, the way you could make people love and hate you. This was... What year did Fable come out? It's original Xbox, right? So, gosh, it must be possibly 360?
2004.
Yeah.
2004. What other games at the time were giving you that? And sure, the systems will feel relatively primitive.
Neverwinter Nights.
Yeah, which everyone wants to play. The systems you'd have in that are probably very archaic compared to today, but they were a bold attempt at trying something new. And I wonder how many people who played Fable were then inspired to go on and make video games as well. So maybe, as is the case for all art that's worth anything, the best thing it ever did was make other people want to pick up the game design manual and start learning how to do that.
Yeah, I think that's we've talked about that role that certain IP has in kind of the creative process, where we look at things like Star Wars and things like Harry Potter, where they're a really, really fun sandbox to just kind of explore and be imaginative. And that is how you end up with future inspirational art, is the kind of stuff that inspires people to be their own artist, to go and kind of engage their imagination and come up with their own kind of creativity to build their own world. And I feel like Fable really, really does a great job of that, to be inspiring, to say like, yeah, this is a fun little kind of variation on a historical version of the world with some twists and turns that, you know, allow you to feel a little more engaged and to make, you know, that historical era fun, because it was not if you're, you know, being too realistic about it.
I've often wondered, and it's to do with Star Wars being a sandbox, Star Trek being a sandbox. And you think about how many people probably got some of their very earliest experiences of writing from writing little fan fictions for themselves, sort of in their bedrooms, just in those universes, like when they're really small, so nothing that was ever being intended to publish on a fan fiction website, however it might be. And I often wondered what impact, and this is a bit of a tangent, but what impact the Game of Thrones Song of Ice and Fire series would have on prospective writers, bearing in mind that the guy who wrote that hates the idea of people writing fan fiction in his world, actively disparages it, talks it down, says you shouldn't do it, you should be coming up with your own characters, etc., etc., etc. A feeling that it's hard to disagree with. Yeah, I think that's probably better for you, is to go out and start writing your own characters, your own worlds. But when you're a really small kid, who probably shouldn't be reading those books, let's be real, there is a lot to be said for just having this splash of characters that already exist that then you can just manipulate and write these little short stories around to learn just about writing and to be able to put things down. The most difficult thing in my experience when it comes to writing, drawing, game design, whatever it might be, the thing that will crush you is never finishing anything. If you start your projects and you don't have a sense of scale, and then you realize, oh, well, I started writing that song, but I've only got 40 seconds of it, or I started writing that book and I got as far as the first chapter. I think fan fiction, they've got this nice advantage in that there's this palette of characters already laid down before them, with already ascribed motivations and ideas behind them, and all you've got to do is put them together. And it probably lends itself to actually people finishing what they write. This is a big, big jump, but probably does. And I wonder how much of a difference that makes the people going on and then becoming writers when they get older, or musicians when they get older. It's just the ability to finish.
I think it's very funny that you bring up George R.R. Martin and his stance on like fanfic, and he says like, go write your own stuff, and then point out that having that framework in place helps you complete a work, helps you get to the end. Meanwhile, George R.R. Martin hasn't finished his main series that everybody loves. So yeah, I'd have to agree with you. Maybe if he engaged in a little more fan fiction as a child, he'd have finished the fucking series by now.
You're listening, George? You might be, because fuck knows what else you're doing with your time.
Yeah, you're sure shit not writing.
I'm positive he's an active listener and subscriber, which reminds me,
yeah.
make sure you all subscribe. And not only that, but hit the icon to alert yourself when we have a new episode.
So you can be notified when we pick fights with famous authors.
Who definitely watch the podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's one thing to actually like be subscribed or like our videos, comment, but I kind of low-key hit it, and I've told Com about this before, but that little alert icon, if you can do that, you always get notification, because sometimes YouTube will say, yeah, we know you're subscribed over here, we know you like this thing over here, but you might like this over here better. So hitting that little alert icon, which I can't imagine that you would do with us, but I mean,
I'm not sure you're allowed to use the word low-key anymore. You made that very clear.
So I'm going to be turning 50 very soon, and my only advice, because I do have a writing background, I mean, I have a creative writing degree, but writers, and this is going to be stating the obvious, but writers write, painters paint, so on and so on. And that's true because they do it all the time, and you don't just, everything you put down is not going to be great. It's just not. Everything you draw is not going to be great. You may just be a wonderful illustrator, but not everything you do is going to be amazing. But you get to those points where you start to understand your style and your ideas and your emotions at the time, and sometimes all that just comes together, and you'll miss it if you just don't continue to do it. So I agree with the point of like, sometimes you need to have a goal to end, but sometimes really the more important thing is just to do it, take that step forward.
I'm really glad you made that point and brought us back to that conversation, because that's really where I wanted to go with that. I completely disagree with the assertion that you shouldn't engage in fanfic. You shouldn't use somebody else's writing to kind of kickstart your own. You absolutely should, because writing is a skill, and skills only improve when you practice. So if you feel most comfortable building off an existing framework that somebody else has used to write a fanfic, go for it. You will improve your own writing by doing that. And then when you feel more comfortable with the writing that you've been able to do, you'll probably look to build your own intellectual property at that point when it feels right for you. But if you're intimidated by somebody saying like, oh, don't go write fanfic, go build your own stuff, and it's somebody you respect, you're probably going to be discouraged from engaging in something that you enjoy and something you could be great at with the investment. So I wholeheartedly disagree with him. If it's something you have an interest in, pursue it. You'll get better over time. And then you can kind of branch out and try to be a bit more independent in the creative process. But don't let George R.R. Martin tell you how to live your life. Fuck that guy.
Well, I'm thinking about when you're really engaging in the practice of writing. So I don't mean you're trying to create another story that's going to be your magnum opus, the one that you sell, the one you make your life on. But when you're practicing writing, because you should practice, it is something you get better at with time and repetition. Let's say you don't really do dialogue that well. It's really early in your life. You don't do dialogue that well. You're practicing. You're trying to learn how to get better. The best thing you can do is write some dialogue. Just get two characters together. Well, you might have more fun doing it if you've got these characters that you know. You just say, yeah, I want to imagine what this scene would be like between these two. So you're more likely to finish it because you don't have to set up their motivations. And you're more likely to finish it because you're probably just enjoying it. In the same way that if you're doing, let's say you're doing game design and you've got to make some shit platformer just to figure out like how collisions work.
Yeah.
Well, if you suddenly pretend that one of those characters is, and he said Master Shepard. If you pretend one of those characters is Commander Shepard, you might actually have a bit more fun now. And then you imagine that he's actually on the Sari planet with the fucking stuff. Well, the Ewoks. That's Star Wars. You know what I mean. Shut up.
I
think
can
I'm a
clearly
stroke.
tell you've put a lot of thought into this.
I like where it's going though.
Yeah.
But hold on. He's hit Star Wars. He's hit Mass Effect. We've had a bit of Halo.
Master Chef Shepard.
Master Chef?
Master Chef Shepard dealing with the Ewoks. Oh man.
On the fucking planet of
Jedi
the teddy
Master
bears.
Mario. It's a good game.
I like it.
This is definitely getting past the lawyers. Definitely.
No, I completely appreciate everything that you guys are saying. I mean, I joke, but I mean,
I agree with what you were trying to say.
No. I mean, it makes, again.
Don't say it makes sense. It's the one thing you can't say.
Yeah. The important thing is you tried, and you'll get better at forming ideas the more you try.
Yeah, and I would have had more fun now if this was talking with Jamie Lannister, if this was talking with Commander Shepard. I would have had more fun. I'd work on this.
I like that you would have enjoyed the podcast more if you were doing it with anyone else who's not us.
Where is Lou?
Well, remember, she didn't want you in their podcast.
Yes,
so.
the one person.
She didn't say shit about me, yo. She wanted you out.
Oh,
Didn't say shit about me.
No, her exact words were, "It can be anyone except Com."
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. Go back and check.
Oh my goodness.
It
We're gonna have
was.
to go back.
Go back and check.
You're going to make me
You can go back.
and record your VOD, and I'm going to...
You can go back. You can go back. You can go back and you can check by the light of my trusty gas lamp.
But no, one of the, and I'll probably close this off
This was
here.
a fucking gaming podcast like 45 minutes ago.
Yeah. But I like where it's kind of going, because we're really just exploring the creative side of how one thing can lead to another, which also includes game design. But I know for me, like for science fiction goes, you would think like all the Star Wars stuff I love, and the fantasy things that Baldur's Gate and whatnot. That's actually not my favorite fan fiction.
So sorry.
Yeah.
Can I briefly stop us, because it's been hitting me for quite a while now. The way the headphones are falling and the exact camera angle, it looks like there's a dick on your shirt, Banana.
It really does, doesn't it?
It's been in my eyes, but there we go. Oh,
The moment you said, "Can we please stop for a second?" I looked at myself in the camera and I was like, I hope that's not where he's going with this. And sure enough, it's exactly what it was.
oh, it was okay when the headphones weren't where they were, but as soon as they were there,
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying, "Can we please stop for a second?" But no, we can't. And this is definitely going in an episode.
it's gonna cut back in. I'm suddenly gonna be really red.
It's going to be everybody's new fanfic character, Captain Dick Shirt.
Master Chief Dick Shirt.
Because I could go on and give you a list of references as long as Com's dick, which is miles and miles.
Do you remember when we used to talk about video games?
Imperial metric comms dick.
A few inches later.
But I would say for me, when it comes to, just famous authors, maybe like things that have inspired me, it's actually the science fiction ideas like Dune, which are so different from any other science fiction out there. Because there's no aliens, there's no computers. It's just like an idea of like humanity thousands of years in the future that has resorted to having to embrace its own mental capacity of what humanity could be. And it kind of takes that idea way further. Not just the movies don't really kind of cover that. But the books are so amazing when it comes to that type of stuff. And then they're really written really well. That's always been kind of like my influence. So even though I have like this love of Star Wars and, Baldur's Gate and all that stuff, to me, that's just fun for gameplay. But from a writing perspective, I don't think I could ever make a game probably writing the way, because that's my perspective. It's like, we don't need laser fire. We have an ability that's outside of that system, and it looks like laser, maybe it acts like laser, but it's actually something else entirely. So Frank Herbert was really great about taking details and then just saying, this is a different world, different scenario, but there's a lore reason. So that's, I guess maybe that's where a lot of my deep lore comes from, because there's a context for the lore, then it makes sense. It's not just we have lasers because it's the future. That's Star Wars. So
I find
Star Wars
Dune-
is the past.
yeah, though that's the past. Yeah.
It's like, this man doesn't even read. I found Dune to be an odd one. I didn't actually enjoy reading the books that much. I read them when I was quite young. I read them again probably in my early 20s and had a much better time with it. But I think the thing with sci-fi is generally I find it to be more interesting than fantasy. Sort of as a broad rule across an enormous set of genres, because I love The Lord of the Rings, as basically everyone does. So this isn't a real knock on fantasy. This is just I tend to find it broad strokes more interesting. I feel fantasy often feels so derivative that it doesn't call to me in a way that science fiction occasionally does. I think it's better at dealing with modern topics, honestly, which would make sense really when you think about it. Often it can feel very strange, especially if you're not creating your world fully from scratch, or maybe if you're stuck in established tropes. It can feel very strange when you put something that feels too modern into a fantasy book. Whereas sci-fi, it makes sense that we would have modern concepts in there. To be clear, I want these concepts in my fantasy books. They often feel strange. They don't quite feel right. And it feels sort of ham-fisted. And when it's done well, it's done really well. But I feel sci-fi does a better job, especially near-future sci-fi. That's really my sweet spot. That tends to deal with issues really, really well. Probably the best one I read in the last 15, 20 years or so was a book called Blue Remembered Earth by Alistair Reynolds. Alistair Reynolds. Yeah. I thought that was one of the most interesting books I've ever read that was dealing, and it was very clear, honestly, calling it allegory feels like it doesn't say enough. It was almost a very literal description of what will happen to us as a species if in the near future we don't change our shit up. But it was just dealing so well with the topics that I almost forgot while going through. So it was imbibing this message in you whilst having wonderful characters, wonderful worlds, feeling realistic whilst having the imagination of that near future. That was a tremendous book. Another problem I had with Dune, by the way, is a problem that I believe Frank Herbert couldn't have known about, which was when you keep referring to things in the book as following the BG way, that's a lot more awkward when a few years later that fucking band turns up. And all of a sudden now every time I see the letters BG in his book, I'm just hearing Staying Alive in my head.
Baldur's Gate.
Yeah, I was thinking
Right, yeah.
Baldur's Gate.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm kind of glad that you're going that direction, because that's actually going to be where, because we've been going on for some other stuff, but I think we can talk about 30 minutes about space games. I think that like sci-fi kind of like covers that whole genre.
My entire desktop display just turned red, so that's concerning.
A few moments later.
What do you call them?
The cable.
Whatever generates the colors. They've not blown in one of the monitors.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost certainly a soft
The
version.
CRTs are fine.
Have you checked the SCART lead?
Yeah.
The VGA cord is working.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the real issue with everything turning slightly red is that these are black and white screens. I don't understand.
I don't have less color. I now have more color.
Yeah. Everything's got a very Sin City vibe suddenly.
at least you're not like calm and be like, everything's black.
A new shade of gray just appeared. Wonderful.
Right? All the colorblind members of chat. Legion lives at. Head over there.
Unfortunately for you, you told us to stop recording, so nobody will know.
I'm recording, but
I think he's always recording.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't think he would have stopped. Which means we can get right back into it. And I think it was interesting that you say like you prefer kind of that near sci-fi, the near future. especially because, and this is probably an oversimplification, but I think when you look at fantasy and sci-fi settings, they both give you this kind of unique opportunity to abandon the current problems that we face in society, build a new kind of framework, and say that like, oh, well, this, in fantasy settings, we have magic, and magic can kind of reshape the problems that people are actually concerned about because they have a new tool at their disposal. And in sci-fi, you do that with technology. But I feel like with the two genres, it's a lot more likely that you don't create the rule set that governs magic than you don't create the rule set that governs technology.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when you engage in those two genres, you'll find that fantasy settings make for a better sandbox than they do a narrative, because sandboxes work when that rule set isn't well defined, whereas a narrative works when that rule set is defined. So I would probably agree with you that I think the writing in sci-fi, and especially near sci-fi, where you're not abandoning so many rules to say that like, oh, technology has progressed to the point where we can travel faster than the speed of light, things like that. You have this kind of attachment to reality that forces you to write better, and you almost lose that restriction and free yourself a little too much if you get too far removed from the modern era or like realistic frameworks. So I think I'd probably agree with you that near sci-fi is more my favorite genre in that kind of storytelling, but fantasy is a really, really fun sandbox.
Yeah. But you don't have to explain dragons when you have a fantasy thing. We know what a dragon is. Now, how you portray it may be a little different, but we don't have to sit there and discuss the big lore behind dragons, because that may be in the game, but we don't have to really explore that issue to really understand what a dragon is, right? But when you talk about a science fiction book, movie, game, whatever, you have to sell a lot more. We have to kind of put ourselves in a situation where not everything makes sense, even though it's very close to us. So that's why games like Andromeda didn't work. It didn't have a great story to accompany what was going on. Where Mass Effect was a great story that has a narrative going on that's very interesting. So why do we have this space magic like biotic powers? Why do people like Caden have these issues with it, his L2 implants? Well, because they have to catch up from a technological standpoint, even from a magic standpoint, because these other cultures have been doing it for centuries and we're trying to catch up. So it makes sense why those things exist the way that they do. That's great storytelling, and that's why science fiction can work in some situations, and you just can't copy paste some of those things. But my favorite type of science fiction, and it's just a preference thing, is that low-tech science fiction, very much like Alien. Alien Isolation was so good because of the immersion, because it was so much like the original movie. And if I really felt, you really do feel it, and the sound design is just amazing. But that low tech, where it could be like, we could almost see ourselves there in just 100 years, maybe, but really not. But it's there. Everything's so tangible and palpable, so it makes the scene very real.
I think you have something when it comes to the lo-fi science fiction aesthetic, where we've been lucky enough to have a few films over the years that have really created this language for us, that's what sci-fi is, and they happen to be fucking great. So the big two that I could think of is Alien and all of its corresponding sequels, and then 2001: A Space Odyssey as well, which very much feels like it comes from a similar language of visual storytelling to Alien, in terms of what the banks of computers look like, in terms of what we thought sci-fi would look like. And both of those movies feel like we could be in that world in just 50 years from now, if 50 years ago we'd taken a different path. It's that retro form of the future that we could never end up in that world now, ever. It's just, why would we ever build computers that look like that? Why would we do things that feel like this? But if we'd just taken a little path, a little ways back, we could now be in that world. And there's something about them, that time capsule into the past of what people thought the future would look like, that I think is just really interesting. And you can see it in a less serious way in movies like Back to the Future, when you look at what they thought 30 years ahead or whatever it would have been would look like, and how quaint and cute that looks to us now. And there's something I think to be said about how people thought we would live, and that just becomes very interesting to go back and look at and think, really?
Yeah, I think you can see it in video games as well, obviously. But I think like if you look at Space Quest and what they thought space travel and the future would look like in those, and you're going to like the Galleria Mall in space and what is essentially McDonald's in space, they just took things that were familiar to them, and they're like, so if we move into the future, we're not abandoning this stuff, right? We're gonna keep it going. We're gonna have malls. It's just gonna be there futuristic. We're gonna have fast food. It's just gonna be futuristic. And then you kind of look at the aesthetic of those things, and like everything were these bright, vibrant colors that matched up with the 80s when the vision of that future was created. Then we move into the 90s, and people thought the future was going to be this sleek, metallic finish on everything, and it's like everything is toned down but a little chromed up. So like, all right, why is everything shiny? That doesn't need to be a thing. It definitely is like kind of an interesting insight into what we thought the future would be in each of those time periods when you look at their vision of what is sci-fi created in each of these different eras.
You can often look and you can see what the world that we were living in within these films. So if you go back and you look at the ones we've just said, which was Alien, you can see the computers that they're using and how they directly lead from the computers that were being used in real life. If you go back and look at iRobot, is it Will Smith, I think, in iRobot, that film, everything looks like a fucking Mac. Everything. It's that same feeling, the weird rounded edges that we don't really do anymore, that chromey look to a lot of stuff. And I think it's fascinating to think that in 20 years from now, any sci-fi movie that we make today is going to have that same feeling. And it's going to be a little time capsule into how we thought about the future looking. And we're going to look back at this shit and see how retro this is too.
I want to see that sci-fi version that was the future created during the RGB era, where everything just has this kind of rainbow backlighting for no fucking reason.
Yeah, color vision. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting how our culture tries to display its idea of the future too, because of course we have the 50s idea, which I thought was, in hindsight, when I was growing up in the 80s and stuff, that didn't really appeal to me. But in hindsight, it's really kind of neat how they tried to make it a clean, nice aesthetic look. I think it has some really great ideas there. But then we get into like more recently, like I would say like in the 90s, when steampunk was pretty big, they tried to like place that into like a futuristic setting too. Like how would it look like as steampunk in the future? That almost kind of got my attention because, like I said, with the Dune universe, there's no computers or anything. So you have to use your own engineering prowess to like create these futures. But more recently, I think we have examples. Well, I don't know. I was going to say more recently, but the first thing that popped in my head was like Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri, which is not a recent game. But he did a really great job.
We like to keep it contemporary here.
But he did a really great job of saying, hey, look, this is civilization, but in space. And so he's got Beyond Earth. But I always liked Alpha Centauri. And my wife really loved watching me. It was one of the few games that she liked watching me play. But it takes basically these concepts of ideas, philosophies in your leaders, rather than just saying, oh, we're the United States, so we have this type of perk, or we're Germany, so we have this type of perk. It took philosophies and put it in the future. And now you could mold this planet and work with nature that's an unknown origin, or you can like fight it and become a mastery over with just weaponizing your future. So he really did a good job of taking that concept. And so I don't know, when it comes to like sci-fi, again, I liked Heroes of Might and Magic. Again, a very different type of game, but I don't have to be told what an elf is or a dwarf is or whatever. We just kind of like mix and match those things. But when he did that with Alpha Centauri, I thought there's a concept here that I can kind of get behind. So
I talked recently about how Sid Meier is a name that if I see it on a box, there's an instant intrigue for me that I'm curious to see what he's done next. I think it came up in our recent Peter Molyneux discussion. And what I liked about actually that is I feel that Sid Meier's Civilization, it iterates each generation. They make quite drastic changes sometimes, which, again, I'm all for. I want that. I already have Civ 4. I can go and play it if I want. I already have Civ 5. Give me something new with 7. But I like that those games, and the two I'm thinking of are Alpha Centauri and Beyond Earth, they don't feel like Civilization games. I mean, Alpha Centauri is very different. It was meant to be. I don't even think it's called Civilization: Alpha Centauri. I think it's just called Alpha Centauri. Whereas Beyond Earth is, I believe, Civilization Beyond Earth. But any game where he leaves this world behind, it doesn't feel like it belongs in the series. He did try something new. I don't think Beyond Earth did a great job, which is a shame. I think there was a lot more that could have been done. It feels very samey after a short while. But I love that his approach to sci-fi is different to his approach to the historicity that we see in the Civilization games. And just very briefly, when you're talking about the aesthetic, it was another one that I forgot, actually, which was that 90s look. And the two that came to mind were Beneath a Steel Sky, which I thought really interestingly gave that sort of that trench coaty hero look, that steampunky look, but also just a bit of 90s culture, and then put that into the future. So when you go back and you look at that game, it looks like the 90s, but not. And the other one was System Shock, which didn't take the same path. I think System Shock was much more imaginative, and oddly enough, felt like a sci-fi game that you could have made at almost any time. And I couldn't say, except for the technical limitations of a game, I couldn't say, oh, that game is clearly from the 60s. That game is clearly from the 90s. That game's clearly from 2010s. Because it was just so imaginative and weird and different. And it doesn't feel like a time capsule. But I think those games are so rare. The ones that don't feel like a time capsule of a certain period.
Well, that's kind of an interesting perspective because that's in that horror genre. And one thing about science fiction games is that they, obviously not always, but a pathway to success, it would seem, is to create the dire future and then say how we're able to survive in this future. So like you have, even XCOM, I could argue, is like our future inundated with these aliens and stuff. And so you increase your technology and this and that because now you have to. Necessity is the mother of invention. But, you have like, I had like a ton of games off the top of my head, like Dead Space, for instance, a future, but they're not trying to sell the future to you. This is just, a future because we ran into an issue and it's in the future. So that's how we can deal with it because it's future tech. It kind of fits. It's kind of a lock and key type situation for storytelling, but the scene is not really used necessarily to sell this is our future, but it always seems to be like a dire future so that they can set that scene,
Like sci-fi, in my mind, it functions best as the cautionary tale. I mean, that's what sci-fi is so good at, especially near future sci-fi, because we can feel it. We can put ourselves in this world. Blue Remembered Earth, the book that I mentioned, that is essentially all down to us and how we treat the planet. And it's giving you a sci-fi version of the consequences of what we're doing. Mass Effect, you could say that it deals largely with feelings of xenophobia. It deals with feelings of unity. And it paints this on a galactic scale, so you're looking at interspecies. Oh shit, I can't remember which one it is. Problems with other species.
Depends on the alien and who you're romancing.
Banana, we'll just keep this on track.
we'll just say is inter and move on.
And it's dealing with these very, very simple issues and painting them in a cautionary way. And that's what sci-fi is really good at. Sci-fi is really good, in my experience, at cautionary tales and horror. And it deals well with horror for the very simple reason that it's a world we don't know. We don't know. No matter what sci-fi world we're dropped into, yes, there will be common language, common visuals, but by definition, it's stuff that we don't know. And in some, the characters don't know it either because humanity is progressing at this sort of breakneck speed. So it's perfect for those two concepts.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it with horror is that it's stuff we don't know, but we're building off of our existing understanding to say that like we still have essentially the same processes for learning new information and evaluating new experiences. It's just now in this near future, we're experiencing things that are so far removed from what is normal today that our understanding can't catch up with the speed we're experiencing new things. And that makes for a really, really interesting horror setting where it's just like, all right, you're up against something brand new and you don't have time to learn anything about it because your life is in jeopardy. Like that's a very effective scenario for horror, is you don't have enough time to figure out what you don't even know.
Yeah.
You have to get moving and try to do something, and no clue if it's going to be the right thing or if you're just wasting energy.
Yeah, and in hindsight, you can see why some titles were just bound for success. Granted, you have to execute it, but like Doom, oh, we're going to go to Mars? That's cool. I'm going to face demons? Okay, that's cool. I get a BFG? Okay, that's cool. It was a great game. There you go.
Terrible movie.
Oh, I'm not talking about the movie. The original game. And
no
the
one's
concept,
talking about the movie.
Original
Ever.
game concept and all that. Carmack, they just did an amazing job. But yeah, I mean, I think the setting of a sci-fi is just so infinitely fascinating for me. And I find myself over and over, like when I'm thinking about like cozy game, I'm not thinking of sci-fi. I'm thinking like if I want action adventure or something with a really good story behind it, it's oftentimes a sci-fi game. So
what if there was a sci-fi tavern manager?
Oh man.
I'm just saying.
Do you want to run your own tavern on the Citadel? Do you want to take over Cora's
Do you want
Den?
to work at Quark's Bar on DS9?
Bro.
Obviously, the answer is no, but do you want to own Quark's Bar? Because that's a different experience.
Good point. Yeah. No, let's be clear. No, honestly, I wonder if... No, I don't wonder. I know this is true. There is untapped potential in sci-fi for the sort of cozy games, the slow games.
Yeah.
Just imagine that, just being on this planet all by yourself, sort of cultivating the world around you. Be perfect. And I think I might have one...
Space House Flipper? I'm in.
Satisfactory is not cozy. I think I might have one game that potentially fills it, although it does have one tiny feature that makes it not that cozy. The closest game to what I want is Outer Wilds. There's some of the tone, the color palette, the music. It's so welcoming. Yeah, there's the thing happening. That's a shame. But for 22 minutes,
point of the game.
22 minutes, it's the perfect place to be. And I want that. I want a cozy Outer Wilds game where I just get to stay on that planet and just play hide and seek with the other frogmen.
That's a good point, because I do have a lot of games that are that whole like I guess you would call them farming sims, because at the end of the day, that's what you're kind of doing. You're like growing your own crops, you're cleaning up the environment or the area that you're in, like whatever. But
I guess you could call them farming sims because they're farming sims.
Well, there's a lot of things that you do that aren't farming necessarily, but at the end of the day, I mean, you're kind of like gathering resources and building up. And I think they kind of like include that as like farming sims. Like I think channels that do like farming sim games have a bigger definition of that category than I'm trying to, describe.
I think by definition, like you wouldn't say Mass Effect's not a space adventure because sometimes you go to sleep. Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is another thing we've talked about, the idea of categorizing things and trying to put them in, fixed descriptions. And then you get into nuance and realize that all of your categories bleed over into other categories, and trying to pigeonhole things is really not an effective use of your time.
Now back to the space farm.
Yeah.
That's what I was saying, is that you make a really good point, because I don't know if I play a lot of these kind of games, but I don't know if any space farming sim game that is like that. And that's a good point. Yeah.
There was a game, God, I cannot remember the title. It was essentially kind of a cozy feeling in terms of like the gameplay, but the environment you're in is this kind of capitalistic nightmare where you're, billions of credits or whatever the monetary unit is in debt, and you basically have to work it off. And you're essentially like working in a scrapyard. Hardspace Shipbreaker. That's what it was.
Oh, I've heard of this. Yeah.
It's cozy in the mechanics because you're literally just breaking down a ship. There's no like conflict. It's just, oh, you get this scrap heap and you need to use the tools at your disposal to break it up into consumable matter for the reclamator or whatever it's called that recycles these materials. It's a cozy mechanic, but the idea is that you're basically doing this because somebody owns you at this point. Like, you are so severely in debt that they just get to go tell you this is how you're making money. But it was a cozy kind of game in a futuristic sci-fi world. But like, I don't know that there's too many games like that where you feel like what you're doing is like, this is fun and I'm not worried about too much.
It probably has. Space and sci-fi probably has the same problem that Under the Ocean would have. You can, even if you play Subnautica and you avoid the areas where the Leviathans are, because at the very, very start, you're pretty much safe there. The worst you're going to get is the razor tooth things floating around in the underwater plants. That's it. But even then, just because you're underwater and you can hear things in the distance, it's never quite going to feel cozy, even if you're playing it as so just I want to build my base, I want to build my farm, I want to do that. There's still the every now and again. I think any space game is going to have the same thing, just because you're surrounded by that great unknown. And even if you know the developers didn't put anything in there, what if they did? Yeah. Maybe you'd have to have any sort of space-themed cozy game. I think it would have to be running the store. It'd have to be running the store on the Citadel. It would have to be that. And that I could get behind.
Just wanted a quick disclaimer. I didn't actually progress too far into Hardspace Shipbreaker, so it could turn into a fucking nightmare and I wouldn't know.
I didn't progress far.
The early portions were not a horror game. They were pretty cozy. It might not maintain that throughout the game. So like, if you heard me bring that game up and you were like, that game's not cozy at all, I believe you, but it starts cozy.
But you know, there is a inherent, and I'm not gonna verbalize this well. I can already tell. But the difference between fantasy and sci-fi is that it seems that sci-fi is much more cerebral in how you approach the game. Like, you're never going to think of it in like, say, okay, let me just sink into this alien game in the future. You're always going to be thinking like kind of on the edge of your seat a little bit, like, I have to think outside the box a little bit because these are technologies unknown to me. Whereas in RPG fantasy mechanic, be like, I know there's going to be magic. I just got to figure out how it works. I know there's going to be like some other issue related to fire elemental, whatever, in those fantasy games. But when it comes to like, or charisma, like Bard's Tale or something, you know, there's going to be certain things that you can actually implement that are from game to game. Whereas sci-fi, they may throw out a tech tree at you, and I'm like, I don't know where this tech tree is going to go. I may unlock this, but so there's an inherited uncoziness about it. It's a little unsettling just because you don't know what to expect. And that's not a bad thing. But maybe that's why there's less cozy games about that type of thing.
Yeah, I would say in the way you approach sci-fi, it feels like there's a lot more situations where you'll be asked to kind of think out the way things work. So, you know, like puzzles in sci-fi, you'll probably have to understand how certain things in that world work. And I think in the fantasy settings, you're much more likely to be kind of encouraged to just accept things for what they are. So, you know, in you know, D&D and Baldur's Gate games, you have your classes and you're like, oh, well, a bard is a charisma based caster. And you're just like, okay, why? Why did we suddenly associate spellcasting with a completely different stat? Because when I was playing a wizard, it was based on intellect. And now I have a bard who's just very stupid, but very charming. And he's a more effective spellcaster somehow. But you don't really ask those questions in a fantasy settings. You just kind of accept like, oh, he's charisma based. So I'll just prioritize building his charisma and then we'll just move on. But I think in more sci-fi games, you're kind of asked to like understand how things work so that you can utilize that understanding towards your gameplay or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish.
Well, I was just thinking about the idea of just coziness anyway. So just pulling it into the sort of cozy games realm and the safety that you get in fantasy worlds opposed to in sci-fi worlds. Just imagine for a minute the idea. It doesn't sound like a real word anymore. Cozy. Just imagine a cozy space in your home, and you probably have, I don't know, your books and your bookshelves and your nice soft light, and might be a
You
window
think I
there,
can read?
some curtains, fair point, picture books, maybe a fireplace. It's all very analog in that sense. And then think about your workspace, which is going to be more digital, and you're going to have your laptop, you're going to have your lights, and you're going to have your second screen and so forth.
You and I
There's a
are
very
very
different
different.
feeling between those two areas. And if you think of that sort of I think it's Danish or Icelandic, I can't remember, but that hygge concept, the idea of just comfort and coziness, it just don't include sci-fi. We as a people, as a culture, have become, I think, quite infused with the idea that coziness comes from almost a pre-now period. So a lot of coziness today is take away the trappings of what make you modern. Take away the phone, take away the laptop, take away the TV, put yourself in the corner and read books just like Mama used to do. That kind of thing. Which is, again, probably why just the entire concept of living in a fantasy hobbit hole feels cozier than living on the Citadel equivalent of that in Mass Effect. No matter how cozy you made it. The fact that the lights are blue and there's no fireplace.
Yeah. It's kind of this weird association, looking at it at a very simplistic level.
Oh, that's all we do.
We associate coziness with warmth. So, a fireplace, that's a cozy feeling. A simple shelter from, rain with a fire burning in the middle is cozy. And then when you get to futuristic settings, everything's kind of cold and sterile, which is the opposite of cozy. And so you're kind of naturally leaning into a setting where the things that are associated with coziness aren't there anymore. You want your systems, your electrical systems, to run at optimal efficiency. That's why we keep server bays in the refrigerated basement. It's cold. They need to be in a cold environment. People don't. People prefer to be warm. And warm is not sci-fi.
So we could kind of spin that on its head. Like in my head, it was like if I was, making a cozy sci-fi game, you could have it like a crash, spaceship crash, whatever. You have a limited resource because of what you can get from that. But let's say you want to like have, I don't know, a pet or two that you find, and they're not good with like your new sci-fi stuff. So to make it cozy, you have to use the available environment, organic things, and therefore you turn your sci-fi brain into an organic setting. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, and we immediately start undoing the overall sci-fi aesthetic.
Yeah,
which is the point that I was making.
Cozy was there's a crash. Like that's how you start your cozy game, with like a fucking tragedy. Oh, this is nice and familiar.
It's a survival game, but we have to have our little space doggo,
Here's my idea for a cozy game. It's a sci-fi survival horror.
Well, there's a thing to it as well when you think about just the overall color palettes that come to mind when you think of sci-fi. 1 second. Up. The overall color palettes that come to mind. And if you think of Lord of the Rings, I think of green. I think of Hobbiton and the Hobbit holes and all that beautiful green. And then sci-fi, I think of blue. Cold blue, maybe black, silver. They just don't feel warm. They don't look like the sunlight striking you.
What's great is that games like Nier Automata take that to another level. They intentionally make you feel distant from those things, and then they bring in that, there's organic life here, and it just looks different. It feels different because you're so used to this color palette that's very black and white.
Yeah, I think it's again that association. Like we have those things that we associate with coziness, and they're overwhelmingly kind of natural. So like the earthy colors, the earthy tones of green and brown feel cozy. And then you'll throw in like orange for, a fire or something, and it feels cozy. And then you have, steel as your primary color and like blue backlighting. None of that feels cozy anymore. That feels artificial, and artificial doesn't feel cozy.
I think more than the green that I mentioned, it's the addition of the red. I think and it can be soft, small amounts of red that are just warming the color up, or it can be the color red. But as soon as you have those, it feels warm. We can easily see why red might feel warm. That is the simple, most logical reason for it. But yeah, just the visual language that these two genres use is so different, and the one is so much more inclined to make you feel like you're in a comfortable, safe place, and the other doesn't. The other feels like you need to get out of it and get back to the comfy, safe place. I'm imagining, honestly, if you ran this business on your space station in your game, you'd probably spend a lot of time picking up nice carpets and coming up with nice soft tapestries to put on the walls to make it feel un-sci-fi, like when you were in there.
And that's why I think like games like Star Wars Outlaws did a really great job of some of those, because you do go to a lot of taverns. Some of them are highly imaginative. Like I took some of those, I took screenshots because I was like, I got to make this in Planet Coaster. It all comes back to like do another, get in the spirit.
Wait. Put them on the screen.
I don't have them yet. I haven't built these things yet, but no, I mean, yeah. I have screenshots.
This episode will be released in 3 to 4 months when Legion gets the time to build all of the Star Wars universe in Planet Coaster.
I have the screenshots for the Star Wars Outlaws, but I mean,
that'll do. Yeah. Put them on the screen.
But like you would have like these trees like in the middle, and because the different planets you would go to had different biomes, and so they some of them are like really super cold. So it's like all this like so they had like these little heaters on their tables, you know. So it was like they really thought about it. So again, it got a lot of flack for it when it came out. And again, like Banana says, it's a game from a long time ago, but it does indicate futuristic type stuff. And so it's so interesting how they did a lot of that. So like I said, you're in a lot of bars, you're in a lot of like those restaurant type places, even outdoor type patio restaurant things. And they did show how you could do sci-fi cozy, believe it or not. Yeah.
I think there's one point that Com raised towards the end of his last kind of
rant
statement. I'll go with statement.
Diatribe.
Where you associated cozy with that feeling of being safe. And I agree with that, but I think the reason that sci-fi struggles with that is because in almost every sci-fi environment, you're expanding the effective universe that the human race now understands. And it's really difficult to feel safe when you're feeling very small and insignificant. Yeah. And so when you have, a bar on a space station and now people are traveling essentially light years instead of miles, everything feels a little bit less safe because there's now so much more going on that we have to be concerned with. There's so much more that we still don't understand. Whereas, if you're just thinking in the context of your little blue marble, you don't feel as insignificant because you're not considering what's going on other planets. You're still in a much larger environment, but it's not quite so overwhelming.
I think you can also add to it, almost certainly, because sci-fi tends to be cautionary, I tend to associate sci-fi with fascistic tendencies. You tend to have surveillance. So you might well find that in most of these places, your space isn't even your space anyway. there's probably some cameras in the station linked to where you are, and even if no one's looking, you know that they can. You know that they can listen in. You know there are mics. You know there's probably the public address system. There's probably a thing in your room. But what if it goes both ways? What if that can come back? You can always, in these sci-fi space stations, you can always be interrupted. You can always be spied on. Whereas if you think of the coziness of that place out in the woods or wherever it might be, you can't. This is just for you. No one's listening. You can pull up the blankets and you think, I can fart here and no one's coming in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, good. That is
Banana.
an excellent point.
It was not the level of art that I was suggesting we were capable of earlier.
I'm right, though.
Yeah, I'd definitely say that, like, that feeling of safety disappears when you realize that, like, technology has advanced so much to the point that privacy no longer exists. It's a lot easier to feel cozy when you feel sheltered from judgment, more or less. You know, people aren't concerned with what's going on with you. You can just withdraw into your little hobbit hole and read books. Nobody's going to bother you.
It's a multifaceted sense of safety. It's not safety just in the sense of I'm not going to be killed by the tiger. It's safety in the sense of, yeah, no one is looking at me now. No one cares about what I'm doing in here, and I don't care what they're doing out there. And that's what's really missing in that sci-fi setting, is that true feeling of isolation.
Yeah, because in a fantasy setting, you go to, you know, a bar or whatever. You're not being monitored. There may be some people that are listening in or something like that. But in a sci-fi setting, you go to the seedy bar, you go to the underground bar to avoid that because you know the monitor. It's like just inherently there. You know, you probably assume that you're being spied on just because it's the future. It's weird.
Yeah, I think there's also an element of the reliability of information in sci-fi that takes away some of that that sense of safety. So not only are you probably being watched in a lot of these sci-fi scenarios, you're likely being recorded. Yep. So not only is it that, like, people are invading your privacy, but now they have evidence of whatever you were doing in that moment that could be used against you in certain situations. So, you know, a slip of the tongue might turn into more severe consequences because somebody was recording it at that time. Whereas in, you know, a fantasy setting, there aren't video cameras, there aren't audio recording devices, and they aren't so pervasive that they're going to be everywhere. There are spaces where you can just say what's on your mind, and the worst case scenario is that somebody will remember it, and their memory is not so reliable that you can be like, no, I can explain this. Whereas, you know, if it's just a raw recording, feels a lot more damning when people try to imply that you've said something wrong.
Well, add on to it as well, the idea of what you know. So think of a sci-fi bar and think of a fantasy pub. So already the two words, to me, they feel different. Pub feels cozy. Bar feels bit more I'm on the road. It's a bit more travel-y. It's a bit more stuff might happen here. If you think of a fantasy pub, and you say to the barman, you know, what's the latest news? So, well, news doesn't reach these parts. Nothing gets outside the village, that kind of thing. So you're kind of living in a snow globe when you're in this fantasy world where nothing quite outside the boundaries of that globe really matter. And nothing that's happening within the boundaries of the snow globe really matter to those on the outside. They're quite separated. And you might hear, oh yeah, there's dark whisperings about what's happening in the forest. Yeah, and that's as bad as it's going to get. Whereas sci-fi, everyone can know everything. They're living in a world like we're living in now, where they've got access to space Twitter or wherever it might be. And if they want to know whatever's happening in the galaxy, all those bad rumblings, all those bad ideas, they can get immediate access to them. And there's that ever-pervasive, ever-present threat, where in the fantasy world, we know nothing about what's going on outside of our borders. In the sci-fi world, a bit like Elon Musk's Twitter account, we know nothing about everything that's going on in the entire world.
You're talking about the...
And that is inherently not cozy.
You're talking about the god gamer Elon Musk? What?
The god gamer who pays other people to play video games for him?
We'll get into that later.
I don't know anything about this story.
I'll tell you about it, but we'll cover it at maybe some other time. But I'll probably even have to edit this out because this is so stupid.
I also love. So there was
more serious things that concern me rather than that bullshit.
There was a tweet not too long ago of Elon Musk and his bullshit about the woke mind virus, but he entered like fake Unix commands to delete the woke mind virus that just showcased that Elon Musk has never entered a Unix command in his life. So like if you are even remotely familiar with Unix, you're just like, that's not a thing. Like you just typed in words that won't accomplish anything. Meanwhile, Elon Musk is supposed to be a tech genius who doesn't understand the fundamentals of this operating system.
Again, to be clear, and this is not where I expected this podcast to go. He's an investor, not an inventor. There is a very, very key to change. No, I'm not aiming that at you.
You and I know that. Yeah. The overwhelming perception of Elon Musk is that he's a tech giant, despite the fact that he has no understanding of tech. He pays other people to understand it, but he presents himself as if he understands it, and he doesn't.
You know what? With a person I liked more and respected more, I would say that's a valuable skill too. Being able to do that, being able to lead
the first part of that, hiring people who know more than you, recognizing that they know more than you and letting them maintain their area of expertise. That's a wonderful ability.
Why do you think Banana's on the podcast? We don't know what the fuck we're on about.
But presenting yourself as if that's who you are, that you are that kind of intellect in this particular area where you clearly don't know anything.
Before I lose track, because I gotta edit all this, so I want to
No, we're keeping that in.
No. Fuck Elon Musk.
No, we'll get to that. But let me close this one, so because we're right about the end of it anyway. Yeah. So.
Now I got like 45 more minutes of just ranting about Elon Musk.
Well,
episode 42, the Elon episode.
Yeah. And it's just the two of you sitting there like completely bored because I've just been speaking my own mind and not letting you interject.
Colin gets up, uses the restroom, comes back 20 minutes later.
Don't bother pausing it. Just keep it going.
Somehow Calm leaves and I get louder.
Banana starts standing up and lighting things on fire, literally.
All of a sudden the camera starts moving. We realize there's other people in the room. Yeah. Who the hell is he speaking to?
Yeah, I'm just in this impassioned speech, completely isolated from any external stimuli. I'm just getting myself more and more worked up, and you guys are just watching it happen.
Kiki is picked up and brushed just for calming him down.
Yeah. No, she's like cowering in the corner.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate everybody being here. And
on that note...
On that note, I do have to, by the way, just bring us towards this conclusion. I'm still not entirely sure what the topic of this episode was. What was it?
Apparently
sci-fi?
coziness.
No,
coziness?
It was sci-fi games and how we can kind of like...
sci-fi versus kind of medieval fantasy is pretty good.
Well, it was just a broad, overarching sci-fi in gaming type thing, and how so different it is compared to,
and why Elon
it's not a criticism. It was just the way we never really defined it. We just sort of stumbled across it.
It does feel like we do that occasionally, where we stumble into the topic of an episode just because we can't shut our mouths.
But y'all stayed on Fable for so long. I was just like, I gotta get this in here. So yeah. But anyway. But I appreciate everybody being here today. We have, again, AMKomnenos, who's been streaming Morrowind lately, and I thoroughly have enjoyed that. It's like reliving it all over again.
We have AMKomnenos, whose hair looks shit all the time.
And Banana hates him. But and we have BananaHammockRepublic, who actually is, like I said before at the beginning of the podcast, has a Let's Play that he's going to be releasing here probably by the time this episode comes out. Check it out. He's very entertaining, even if he doesn't want to admit it. I think he's very entertaining. So
it's a very good game I'm playing. I'll say that. This is the one positive thing about the Let's Play. I'm playing a great game. I am not the reason it's great, though.
We will check you guys later, and make sure you hit the subscribe, like, comment, but most importantly, I know it's hard for me to kind of say, but hit that alert icon. That way you never miss a notification. But yeah.
Low key.
Yeah, low key. We'll check you guys later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Fuck you, Elon Musk. I know you're listening.